Well, good morning, folks, and thanks for joining us in our midweek videos as we go over the book of John. Now, this week we've been reading John chapter 3 and then some related verses. Jordan will be looking at Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus in John chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. What we want to do just real briefly this morning is spend a couple minutes on John chapter 3, verses 16 through 20. Before we read that, let me just make this statement. You know, sometimes the complete picture of truth can be confusing. And sometimes it can even seem to contradict itself. And this is certainly true when you're talking about God's judgment. So let's look at John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. This is what it says. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And whoever believes in him is not condemned. But whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. That sounds pretty clear, doesn't it? Jesus came to save us, not to judge us. But now look at verses 19 and 20. We continue on there, and John says, "This is the verdict, that light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light, for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." This is interesting. Ultimately, Jesus says, it's not sin that condemns us. It's rejecting the remedy for sin. It's rejecting the cure for sin that leaves no option apart from being separated from God. Does that make sense? Are you following Jesus' thought here? Let me give you an illustration. Let's say you had a tumor that was going to kill you, but a doctor says that we can operate. We can remove the tumor and you'll be just fine. But if you refuse to let the doctor operate, well, you'll die. So the reason you'll die is because you didn't accept the remedy for the problem. Now, technically, we get it, we understand. Technically, you die from the tumor. But in reality, you die because you didn't accept the remedy for the problem. And it's the same with sin and judgment. Technically, yes, it is sin that condemns us and separates us from God. But in reality, the reason that we're judged and condemned is because we didn't accept the remedy for sin, believing in Jesus. But, you see, that's only part of the problem in understanding about judgment. Because in John chapter 5, in verse 22 and 27, this is what Jesus says. For not even the Father judges anyone, but he has given all judgment to the Son. And then in verse 27, he says, and he gave him, God gave him, Jesus, authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. He doesn't judge, he does judge. Which one is it? Well, without going too deep into the theological woods, let me just offer a simple explanation. Jesus came into the world to save us. That was his goal. That was his mission. However, now that he's done that by his death and resurrection, the Father has placed in his hands the responsibility for final judgment of all mankind. One of the early church fathers put it this way. Let us remember that there are two advents of Christ, two comings of Jesus, one past and the other to come. The first was not to judge, but to pardon. The second will not be to pardon, but to judge. I hope that makes sense. And if you still have questions about what Jesus says or does, we want you to pull one of us aside on Sunday morning and ask. And if that's not possible, just send a question to the church office here and we'll get back to you. But remember, there is no reason to fear the judgment, because Jesus bids us, one and all, to come to him and to receive new life, a life that's free from guilt and sin and judgment. I hope this helped. We look forward to seeing you Sunday. God bless you and thanks.